The sun was just beginning to rise as Mark quietly slipped out of his small two-bedroom apartment, careful not to wake his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, who was still fast asleep in the room they shared. The peeling paint on the hallway walls and the creaky wooden steps outside were all too familiar, reminders of the modest life they lived. Mark had been a single father for nearly 4 years, ever since his wife passed away in a car accident. Since then, life had been a constant balancing act between working long shifts and being the father Lily needed. He worked 2 jobs, one as a janitor at a local school during the day, and another as a waiter at a high-end restaurant in the evenings. His days began before dawn and ended long past midnight, yet he never let exhaustion interfere with his most important role, being there for Lily. Every morning, he packed her lunch with little hand-written notes tucked inside, small reminders that she was loved. Every night, no matter how tired he was, he read her a story before bed, her small hand curled into his as her eyelids fluttered shut. Their apartment was small, with second-hand furniture and a kitchen that often rattled when the heat kicked in, but it was filled with warmth, drawings from Lily taped to the fridge, laughter echoing during their pancake Sundays, and an unspoken bond that came from weathering hard times together. Mark had learned to stretch every dollar, often skipping meals to ensure Lily had enough, and refusing any help that came with pity attached. To others, he might have seemed tired, worn down, even invisible. But to Lily, he was a hero. And to Mark, every sacrifice was worth it the moment she smiled or wrapped her arms around him and said, "I love you, Daddy." He had nothing in excess, no luxury, no savings, no free time. But what he did have, he gave freely and completely to the one person who mattered most. The clinking of silverware and the soft hum of a string quartet filled the grand ballroom of the Windsor Hotel, where a lavish charity gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting golden light over the wealthy elite dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Mark moved through the crowd in his crisp black and white uniform, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes. Though the room was filled with laughter and luxury, he kept his head down, blending into the background like he always did at these upscale events. He weaved between tables with practiced ease, offering drinks with a polite smile before slipping away unnoticed. The guests barely looked at him, most of them didn't see the servers, only the service. But someone did see him. Seated at a corner table, a woman in a sleek emerald green gown watched him with sharp, curious eyes. She was striking, tall, poised, and undeniably powerful. This was Veronica Sterling, a billionaire entrepreneur whose face often graced the covers of business magazines. Known for her fierce intelligence and uncompromising drive, she rarely came to events like this, but tonight she had made an exception. And now, her attention was fixed on the quiet man with tired eyes and a sincere smile. There was something different about him. It wasn't his looks, though he had a rugged handsomeness that time and hardship hadn't erased. It was his presence, humble, grounded, unshaken by the opulence around him. She noticed how he gently corrected a fellow server who almost tripped, how he smiled at an elderly guest and helped her with her chair, how his eyes flicked toward the exit for a brief moment, perhaps thinking of someone waiting at home. He didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't appear to seek recognition. That intrigued Veronica more than any polished executive or wealthy heir ever had. She watched as he passed by again, this time catching his eye for just a second. It was a fleeting glance, but something in it sparked a thought in her, a reckless curiosity. She wasn't used to being curious. She was used to being in control. But as she took another sip of her wine and kept her eyes on the man in the waiter's uniform, she knew one thing with certainty: she wanted to know more. The gala was winding down. Guests were beginning to filter out, coats draped over arms and laughter fading into the corridors of the Grand Hotel. Mark stood near the emptying ballroom, rolling his aching shoulders as he stacked used glasses onto a tray. His shift was nearly over, and all he could think about was getting home to check on Lily. He had left her with their kind neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, who always insisted she loved spending time with the little girl. Still, Mark never felt at ease until he was back by Lily's side. As he reached for another empty glass, a smooth voice called out from behind him. "Excuse me, could I have a moment?" He turned and found himself face to face with the woman in the emerald dress, the same one who had been watching him all evening. Up close, she was even more striking. Her features were sharp, elegant, and confident. She radiated the kind of power that made people step out of her way without thinking. "Yes, ma'am," Mark said, straightening instinctively, though confusion flickered in his eyes. "I'm not interested in a drink," she said, her voice low and measured. "I'm interested in you." Mark's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm sorry." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "My name is Veronica Sterling. I don't usually do this, but tonight I'm making an exception. I want to make you an offer, one night. Just one. With me. No expectations, no attachments." Mark blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Excuse me." She looked him straight in the eyes, her tone calm and unapologetic. "One night. In exchange for $1 million. No tricks, no obligations. You walk away after, free and clear. The money is yours." Time seemed to freeze around him. The clatter of dishes, the distant music, the laughter, it all faded into the background. $1 million. A figure so enormous it barely felt real. He could pay off every debt, move to a better neighborhood, give Lily a future he'd only dreamed of. No more long shifts, no more going to bed hungry so she could eat. It was everything he needed, offered in a single moment, from a stranger. But it wasn't just the money that hit him, it was the nature of the offer. Cold, calculated, like he was something to be bought. He searched her face, trying to find some hint of a joke, some sign of cruelty or pity. But all he saw was curiosity. Control. Power. Mark swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "Why me?" Her lips curled slightly, though not unkindly. "Because you're different. Because you said nothing and yet carried yourself like someone who has everything to lose. I admire that. And I'm offering you a chance to change everything." The words hung between them, weighty and dangerous. Mark didn't answer right away. He simply stood there, caught between desperation and dignity, knowing whatever he said next could change the course of his life forever. Mark walked home that night with his hands deep in his coat pockets, the cool night air biting at his skin. The streets were quiet, lit only by dim streetlights and the occasional flicker from an apartment window. He moved on autopilot, his feet knowing the way, but his mind stuck replaying the billionaire's offer again and again like a broken record. $1 million. Just one night. It sounded surreal, like something out of a movie, not real life. He thought of the stack of bills piled on his kitchen counter, the overdue rent notices, the broken heater he couldn't afford to fix. He thought of Lily's worn shoes, her need for a new winter coat, the dentist visit he had to postpone for the third time. That kind of money could fix everything. Yet even as he pictured the relief it could bring, something inside him tightened. When he reached his apartment, he quietly opened the door and peeked inside. Mrs. Delaney had already left, and Lily was fast asleep on their small couch, a blanket half fallen from her tiny frame. Her favorite stuffed bunny rested in the crook of her arm. Mark stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment, his heart heavy. He sat down beside her, brushing a stray hair from her forehead, and leaned back with a tired sigh. What kind of example would he be if he said yes? Would she ever know? Probably not. But he would. Every time he looked in the mirror, he'd see the man who sold himself. He had fought so hard to hold on to his values, his self-respect, especially for her. He remembered what it felt like when people pitied him or looked down on him, assuming he was just another failed man with a sad story. But he wasn't. He had kept going when others would have quit. He had worked when it broke him. Not because he was perfect, but because he had someone who believed he was her whole world. His mind raced with arguments, justifications, excuses. Maybe it wasn't really a betrayal. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe the ends justified the means. But every road his thoughts took circled back to one unshakable truth. Once he crossed that line, he couldn't uncross it. He couldn't undo what it would mean, for him, and for the silent promise he had made to his daughter, that he would never let her down, no matter how hard things got. He sat there in the dark for hours, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing, knowing the weight of his answer would echo far beyond a single night. The next morning came with a gray, heavy sky and the soft patter of rain against the apartment windows. Mark hadn't slept. He had spent the night sitting on the edge of the couch, watching Lily as she slept peacefully, unaware of the impossible decision weighing on her father's shoulders. When the sun finally rose, it cast a dull, colorless light across their modest living room, illuminating the peeling wallpaper, the faded carpet, and the small pile of unpaid bills stacked neatly on the kitchen table. Mark stood and quietly began making breakfast. The smell of scrambled eggs and toast stirred Lily awake, and she padded into the kitchen rubbing her eyes, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms. "Morning, Daddy," she said sleepily. "Morning, sweetheart," he replied, forcing a smile. "How'd you sleep?" "Good. I had a dream we went to the zoo again. The giraffes remembered us." He chuckled softly and handed her a plate. "Maybe we can go again soon." He didn't say it, but the thought echoed bitterly in his mind. If he took that offer, they could go anywhere they wanted. The zoo, a better school, even a new home. He could give her everything she deserved and more. After breakfast, Lily drew pictures at the table while Mark sat across from her, staring blankly at the same bills he had been staring at for weeks. His hands were clenched, his thoughts relentless. $1 million. He could pay off everything. He could start fresh. He wouldn't have to choose between food and rent, or work so many hours that he missed moments with her that he'd never get back. But at what cost? The offer had been transactional, cold. He hadn't felt flattered, he had felt cheapened. Reduced to a price. And that haunted him more than the money tempted him. He thought of Lily, growing up one day, asking about the hard times. Would he be proud to tell her he'd sacrificed his integrity to escape them? Would she still look at him the same way, as her safe place, her protector, her example of strength and goodness? He remembered the stories he told her at night, about honesty, bravery, doing what was right even when it was hard. What would those stories mean if he couldn't live them himself? The battle inside him raged on, between a desperate father and a principled man. He wasn't a saint. He had been tempted, deeply. He wasn't angry at Veronica for offering, it wasn't her job to live by his values. It was his. And in that moment, as he looked at his daughter humming softly and coloring a picture of them holding hands in front of a bright yellow sun, he knew his answer. No amount of money was worth trading the one thing he had left untouched, his self-respect. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Sterling Enterprises headquarters, casting long beams of golden light across the marble floor. Mark stood in the vast, echoing lobby, feeling out of place in his second-hand dress shirt and worn shoes. He had debated for hours whether to come. Not because he was uncertain of his answer, he wasn't, but because he didn't know how to look someone in the eye after refusing an offer that most people would have accepted without hesitation. He took the elevator to the top floor, the air growing colder the higher he went. When the doors opened, a sharply dressed assistant greeted him and led him down a sleek, quiet hallway. At the end was a set of towering double doors made of polished wood. The assistant knocked once before pushing them open. Veronica Sterling stood near the tall windows of her office, looking out over the city skyline. She turned slowly as Mark entered, her expression unreadable, composed, confident, as always. She said nothing at first, only nodded toward the seat across from her large glass desk. He remained standing. "I thought you might come," she said, finally breaking the silence. "I needed to," he replied, his voice steady, though his palms were sweating. "You offered me something most people only dream about. And I want to say, thank you. Not for the offer, but for trusting me with a choice." She studied him carefully. "So, is that a no?" He nodded. "It is." Veronica walked slowly toward him, her heels clicking against the floor. "You don't even want to think about it. Take a few more days. You said it yourself, you have a daughter. This could change her life. I've already thought about it. More than you can imagine. Believe me, I've never needed anything more than I need that kind of money right now." "Then why turn it down?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious, not offended. "You wouldn't be hurting anyone." Mark exhaled, looking her directly in the eye. "Because when I look at my daughter, I want to know I'm still the man she believes I am. Because the moment I sell a piece of myself, I lose something I can't ever get back. And no amount of money is worth that." The room went quiet. Veronica didn't move. She just watched him, her expression softening for the first time since they met. "I grew up thinking people like you had it all," Mark continued. "Money, power, choices. But I realize now that even with all of that, it doesn't mean you have what matters most." A flicker of something passed through her eyes, regret, maybe. Or admiration. She walked back to her desk and sat down, folding her hands in front of her. "You're right. Most people would have said yes. But you didn't even blink. I blinked, Mark said, allowing a faint smile. I blinked all night. Veronica laughed softly, the first real, human sound he'd heard from her since their conversation began. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. If you ever need work, real work, call this number. I could use more people in my company who think the way you do. Mark took the card but didn't look at it right away. Thank you. But I didn't come here looking for a reward. I just wanted you to know that some things, some people, aren't for sale. He turned and walked toward the door, the silence behind him thick with something unspoken. Respect, perhaps. Or something deeper. As he left the office and stepped back into the elevator, Mark felt lighter. The weight of temptation was gone. And though his life was still uncertain, one thing was clear, he hadn't lost himself. Veronica sat in silence long after Mark had left, his final words echoing in her vast office like a slow-burning echo. Some people aren't for sale. It was a phrase that shouldn't have surprised her. She had heard countless moral speeches in her lifetime, usually from people trying to impress her or shame her, but this was different. There had been no bitterness in his voice, no accusation. Only truth. Steady, quiet, and immovable. And that, oddly, unsettled her. She turned back to the window, arms crossed over her chest, staring out at the city skyline. She had built her empire by making offers people couldn't refuse, aggressive takeovers, bold acquisitions, and high-stakes risks. She always got what she wanted because she knew the currency people dealt in: fear, ambition, desperation, pride. She had learned to recognize weakness and convert it into opportunity. But Mark, he didn't follow the rules she'd mastered. He had looked at $1 million like it was just paper. No awe in his eyes. No hesitation in his answer, even if he admitted he had struggled with the decision. In the end, he had chosen principle over relief. Dignity over desperation. Veronica sat at her desk and stared at the untouched glass of wine she'd poured before his arrival. It suddenly tasted bitter, though she hadn't even sipped it. She wasn't used to rejection, not in business, not in her personal life. But what troubled her wasn't that he'd said no, it was how his refusal made her question the game she'd been playing her whole life. She had assumed everyone had a price. She had built an empire on that assumption. But now she had to wonder, if not everyone did, what did that mean for her? For the first time in years, Veronica felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath her polished exterior. It wasn't embarrassment or even anger. It was respect, and maybe a trace of envy. She thought back to the way he looked at his daughter's photo when it had fallen from his wallet during their conversation. The way his eyes softened, as if nothing else in the world existed. That kind of love, pure, unbought, and unshaken by hardship, was foreign to her. She had traded relationships for power long ago. People had either wanted something from her or expected her to want something from them. No one had ever looked at her without calculation. But Mark had. He'd seen her offer, understood the implications, and still walked away, not needing anything she could give him. That shook her more than she cared to admit. For the rest of the afternoon, Veronica canceled her meetings. She sat alone in her office, revisiting every step of her conversation with him, each word heavy with meaning she hadn't processed before. And somewhere in the quiet, as the city buzzed beneath her and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, she realized something else. Mark hadn't just rejected an offer, he had challenged the way she saw the world. And for a woman who had always believed she was in control of everything, that realization changed more than she was ready to admit. The evening air was crisp as Mark stepped off the city bus with Lily's small hand wrapped tightly in his. She skipped beside him, a bundle of energy and laughter, completely unaware of the storm that had passed quietly through her father's life. Her backpack bounced with each step, and in her other hand, she held a wrinkled piece of paper, one of her latest drawings, proudly depicting her and Mark flying through the sky in capes, with the words, "Me and my hero," scrawled across the top in crooked letters. Mark looked down at her and smiled, not the tired smile he wore at the end of most days, but a full, honest smile, one that came from somewhere deep inside. It wasn't because their financial problems were solved. The bills were still on the table. His shoes were still worn. The heater still rattled every time it turned on. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had won something bigger than money. They reached their apartment building, and Lily ran ahead to press the buzzer, laughing as she did every time at how loud it sounded. As they climbed the steps, she turned and looked at him. "Daddy, why do you look happy?" she asked innocently. He paused on the step below her, then knelt so they were eye to eye. "Because I remembered what matters most," he said. Lily giggled, leaning forward to hug him. "Is it me?" Mark hugged her back tightly, closing his eyes for a moment. "It's always you." Inside their apartment, the warmth was familiar, if not physical. Lily ran to show him her newest drawings while he began heating up leftovers. They sat cross-legged on the living room floor that evening, eating from mismatched bowls, surrounded by piles of crayons, paper, and dreams sketched out in bright colors. Mark listened as she told him about her day, how she got a gold star for helping another student, how Mrs. Delaney taught her how to fold a paper crane. And as he watched her eyes light up, he felt a calm he hadn't known in years. He didn't have $1 million. He didn't have security or ease. But he had peace. He glanced at the business card Veronica had given him, now tucked between the pages of an old book. He hadn't thrown it away. He didn't need a reward, but part of him knew that something had shifted for her too. That maybe, just maybe, his choice had left a mark on someone used to buying anything she wanted. But that was tomorrow's thought. Tonight, he was just a father. And that, he realized, was more than enough. Several weeks had passed since Mark had last seen Veronica Sterling. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, early mornings, long shifts, late nights helping Lily with homework by the dim light of a kitchen lamp. Nothing had changed on the surface. The bills still came. The budget was still tight. But beneath it all, Mark felt different, grounded in a way he hadn't before. Something about standing firm in his decision had given him a quiet strength, a sense of clarity he hadn't expected. Then one morning, as he stepped out of his apartment building with Lily in tow, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a juice box in hand, he noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. A woman in a dark coat stood beside it, staring up at their building. It was Veronica. Mark instinctively tightened his grip on Lily's hand. She noticed. "Who's that lady?" she asked, squinting across the street. Mark hesitated. "Just someone I used to work for," he said softly. Veronica noticed them and crossed the street with confident, measured steps, the wind catching the edge of her coat. But there was something different in her now, something less guarded. Less polished. "Mark," she greeted, her tone gentler than before. "Veronica," he replied, nodding slightly. She looked down at Lily, who was hiding half behind her father's leg, peeking out with curiosity. "You must be Lily," she said with a small smile. Lily gave a cautious nod. Mark cleared his throat. "What brings you here?" Veronica took a breath. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation. About what you said. You were right, there are some things money can't buy. And I've built a life forgetting that. I won't pretend I suddenly understand everything, but I know I met someone who reminded me of what it means to stand for something." Mark didn't answer right away. He appreciated her words, but he wasn't sure what she wanted from him now. She continued, "I'm not here to convince you of anything. I just wanted you to know I meant it when I said I could use someone like you. I've created a new position, head of ethics and community outreach at one of my foundations. It's honest work, flexible hours, full benefits, no strings attached." Mark's eyebrows rose slightly. "Why me?" "Because I trust your judgment more than I trust most people in suits with degrees," she said. "And because you reminded me of a version of myself I buried a long time ago." He looked down at Lily, who was now pulling at his coat. "Daddy, I'm gonna be late," she whispered. He turned back to Veronica. "Let me think about it." Veronica nodded. "Of course." She handed him a card, this one different from the last, printed with the name of the foundation and a simple message: "A new beginning doesn't mean forgetting the past." As she turned to go, Lily asked, "Is she your friend?" Mark smiled, watching Veronica disappear into the car. "Maybe," he said softly. "Maybe she's becoming one." That evening, after dinner, Mark sat by the window as Lily colored beside him. He looked at the new business card on the table, then out at the city glowing in the dark. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had a real choice, not one driven by desperation, but by purpose. He reached over and tucked Lily's drawing into the front of his wallet. The same one she always drew. Her and her daddy flying through the sky. And this time, Mark believed it. Maybe they were already soaring.